In this episode, I'm thrilled to be joined by Robert Glazer, a serial entrepreneur with extensive leadership experience and a #1 Wall Street Journal and USA Today bestselling author whose work has redefined how we think about leadership, culture, and performance. Robert's new book, Rethinking 2 Weeks Notice, Changing the Way Employees Leave Companies for the Better, challenges the deeply entrenched norms around employee departures. Robert proposes a radical yet practical alternative that benefits both employees and organizations. In this conversation, we'll dive into the big ideas behind the book and what they mean for leaders like you navigating employee transitions on a regular basis. So let's welcome Robert Glazer to the show. Here are the 2 questions this podcast answers. 1, how do you successfully transition into your first official leadership role? And 2, how do you keep climbing that leadership ladder and continuously get promoted, although the competition and the expectations get bigger? This show, the Manage Your Track podcast, will provide the answers. I'm your host, Ramona Shaw. I'm on a mission to create workplaces where work is seen as a source of contribution, connection, and personal fulfillment. And this transition starts with developing a new generation of leaders who know how to lead so everyone wins and grows. In the show, you'll learn how to think, communicate, and act as a confident and competent leader you know you can be. Robert, welcome to the Manage Your Track podcast. I'm excited to have you here with us and for us to talk about your book, Rethinking 2 Weeks Notice. Can you tell us briefly what the main message is that you are proposing through this book?
Sure, and thanks for having me. Yeah, the main message is a lot has changed in the workplace over the last decade or two, and I think a lot of companies have put more focus on hiring and building great cultures. And we also know that employment is not, for decades or lifetime. Yet the process of how people leave organizations really hasn't changed, and really that just seems like a shame to me. And I think people don't know how to change it. So obviously 2 weeks notice is sort of is a US phenomenon. It doesn't exist necessarily in the rest of the world. There's more statutory sort of notice periods, but the problem is the same. The problem is we haven't changed how people leave organizations and make it okay to leave organizations. You might still be at somewhere in Europe and have to give 8 weeks notice, but you've already decided you're leaving, you're interviewing, you're having doctor's appointments. It's kind of the same. It's kind of the same problem. So I really think we're at the point where we know employment is not for life, and we can change how people leave organizations and make it better for the employees and for the company.
When you think about this idea of the 2 weeks notice that has definitely in the US been around for a long time, there advantages and disadvantages to it. And for me, coming out of Europe and entering the
Very weird.
US
Yeah.
workforce, at some point, I vividly remember that conversation where someone said, yeah, I could literally resign today and walk out. And yes, I do have a 2 weeks notice period, but really you can't hold me back.
Right. It's
I can
employment,
quit and
employment at
not
will.
show up
Yeah.
tomorrow. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And I remember sitting there so vividly in that boardroom, or the boardroom was just like a large conference room, and thinking, wow, I kind of knew about this, but it didn't really hit me until that moment that the fact that this is possible on my team makes me have to rethink how I go about team building and training and cross training and and making sure that important knowledge is institutionalized and how I mitigate the risk of someone walking out and creating sort of a bit of buffer, anticipating or trying to anticipate when someone comes to the end of their employment term with the company and so forth. And while that seemed really challenging for me and was really prompting me to rethink how I built this team, I also saw the benefits of it. So I'm curious to hear. Obviously, this 2 weeks notice has been institutionalized, but also has been
Yeah.
showing up for a long time. Tell us about the pros and cons as you see it.
Yeah. I guess, I mean, you almost have to pull out the 2 weeks notice. There are pros and cons to employment at will, but they still end up with the same issue. This is normally how we find out that someone is ending their employment on our team, right? You're sitting in the office and they say, "Hey, Ramona, can I talk to you for a second?" And they close the door. And every time I say this, someone has a visceral reaction because their heart sinks. They've been in one of these conversations, or they've been laid off in a similar conversation where they close the door and HR is there, right? And say, hey, I'm going to do something else. And whether you can force me to stay for 8 weeks or whatever, it doesn't matter, right? You haven't started hiring, and it could be 2 weeks or a day. You're surprised. The ending really impacts the whole memory of someone's performance. You're like, I mentored this person, I worked with them. Like, what do you like? Like, what do you even mean? And it's just because we haven't changed this paradigm to say, look, we're not. I think it existed when you assumed that people were staying somewhere for life, and that it was weird if they left. But now, even at you look up all the best places to work, and you'll find the average tenure is maybe 2.5 years, something like that. So if we know these things are going to end, like how do we create better endings? And turns out like we actually have to push back probably 6 to 9 months from that end when some things started bubbling up on the employee side or the employer side and figure out how to have an environment of psychological safety, how to have better communication and sort of a system that says, yeah, it's okay to leave here. Like it's more important how you leave here. We're not going to assume that you're going to work here forever.
Okay, tell us more about that. What that would look like, because what I can imagine in our audience's head is happening now is like, what do you mean 9 months in advance? I should tell them it's okay for them to leave. It isn't like I
No,
don't
I don't.
want
I
them
just mean the
to leave.
problems. So
Right.
when you get to the point where someone has quit or you have fired them, it is
Mhm,
usually the manifestation of problems that started to emerge. Let's say, there were fissures in the foundation 6 to 9 months ago, not cracked. Now, a lot of these things can be cured or fixed if you deal with them at the time.
mhm,
However, if you just wait, it often becomes unrepairable. So I kind of talk in the book around when something is not working, when someone is, unhappy, not saying they have these conversations and, managers engage and they have real conversation. Ramona, what's going on? You seem to be constantly late, not engaged, tell me like, and really mean it. And you have trust with your boss and so you kind of dive in. And I talk about there's kind of three roots to most problems. There's things the employee can fix and has to. There's things the employer can and want to fix, and then there's things that won't change. So
mhm,
so here's the thing. If let's just say I'm firing you. I'm firing you this week because you've been totally disengaged and your work has been sloppy and been a mess. Like if we rewind that tape back 9 months and we had a conversation, I might as well found three things. First, maybe you lost your childcare and you've been like really struggling and working around the hours and didn't want to tell anyone. Okay, we can sit down and have a conversation and talk about maybe making some changes to the hours, like, but hey, look, or you need some training, or here are the things that you need to do. So the manager can be accommodating to this, but this is something the employee is going to have to change and wants to change,
mhm,
right? And maybe kind of letting that out of the bag was helpful. Well, maybe like the reason you're frustrated, whenever, is you're interviewing for jobs, already every day, and you're kind of, checked out. Well, that there's not a lot I can do, or you really want to work in an office and we're all remote, right? So there's some things that the employee can change, the employer can change or not change, right? And you may want a raise, and I may think you're not worth that raise at all, or actually like, you know what, we really should have given you a raise. It's been way too long. So, but by digging in there, or you came from the sales team and you really are not liking sales, and you want to go back to the marketing team, right? So kind of getting in at the first signs of disengagement and unhappiness, and figuring out, is this something we can fix? Can we change something? Can you change something? But if I wait 6 months, to the point where now it's 3 quarters and a lot of animosity is built up and you're doing really poorly now because you're doing poorly. I'm all over you and now all this stuff. Like there's not a lot of good options at that point. You end up with a sort of typical performance improvement plan, which does nothing because it's designed to just document the person's failures, not correct anything early on. And that, I think, is the problem, is that most organizations and managers haven't created the sort of psychological safety in a space to start having these conversations early. We've had some
mhm.
incredible stories at our company over the year of people that have taken jobs elsewhere, great jobs, people have switched internally. But all these things happened because we had a conversation and we knew what was going on, and we could
Mhm.
kind of look out for those opportunities when they came around.
I had an experience in two different companies. One of them was sort of that mindset of you will stay here forever. We're your family. You give us the, 60, 70 hours a week of your life, and that's all you're going to do. This is the assumption, right?
Yeah.
Unless you tell us otherwise. And then I worked with a company that had a very different approach where top down, the communication was, I know this for everyone here. This is, including myself as the founder CEO, this is a stepping stone to something else. And in fact, I, as a CEO founder, I actually want to, live off the grid. This is a means to that
Yeah.
end. This
Yeah.
business will help me be able to plant all the trees and all the everything that I need in order to create that life. And it was such an opening to then be able to share more transparently, like, why am I actually here and what am I looking to get out of it? So we can have this transparent conversation about, roles and responsibilities, growth within the company or outside of the company that seemed a lot more natural. But at the same time, when I look at sort of somewhere in between, like most of the companies are not on, not.
Yeah. That second example is more utopian. I mean, it's what I'm pushing for in this book, but
Mhm.
the first one, and look, that first company shouldn't be surprised when everyone surprises them, right? Because they've
Yeah.
said, like, look, well, the way we're going to act is like you're never going to leave, and it's a betrayal, and you're leaving the family, and so yeah, you're going to wait till the last minute, and you're going to lie to them, and then they're going to be pissed at you, and this is, but to me, this is silly because it doesn't reflect reality, right? You're not family. It's not a family business.
Mhm.
They can let you go. It's employment at will. We need to stop pretending that. And I would rather, I think a lot of us are just assuming that the devil we don't know is worse than the devil we know. Like, I would rather know about these things.
Mhm.
One of the common pushbacks on a program like this is, how can you have someone, because we advocate for sort of transition periods, whether it's 90 days where that person can go look for the new job, you can work on finding their replacement, they're interviewing, you kind of work
Mhm.
this out so it works out. Oh, they're going to steal stuff, they're going to behave badly. I'm like, well, you're helping the person, you're working respectfully, and you're keeping your eyes on them. Like, you don't have to worry about the person that that's quitting and leaving. You have to worry about the person that quit a year ago and they stayed. That's the person who started
Right.
copying files, and because you don't even
Right.
know they're pissed. They're quit your company a long time ago. They just haven't found a new job yet.
Yeah. Yeah. And if they want to transfer files, they're going to do it regardless of when they communicate.
Well before
Yeah.
they give notice, well before the end, yeah. And look, what happens eventually with these things when you wait too long, and finally, like, Ramona leaves, and then and let's say again she's in sales. It's always worse. But the cleanup. Then you get in there, oh well, she hasn't updated her pipeline in 9 months, and so her book of business is really. Has anyone ever finally parted way with someone where they weren't working out, and then found there wasn't a whole bunch of buried dinosaurs for them? Like, it usually gets worse for 90 days as you keep learning about all the work that the person wasn't doing.
Hmm. Right. Now, if we switch sides though, and we look at it now from the perspective of the employee who would say, I'm going to, or if what you're suggesting is I should seek that conversation with my manager to say, hey, I'm starting to feel like this is not the right fit for me. I'd like to talk about what's next for me and figure out a timeline with you. What they may feel is that they're potentially sacrificing or sabotaging themselves because there's retribution that they're facing. They may be cut out of relevant work that could help them in future jobs. They may not be put up for promotions or salary bumps that they would get if they weren't
Yeah.
to communicate. And if they don't yet have a job, they actually don't know, will I stay here for 3 months or for nine
Yeah.
months?
So I want to be 100% clear. I am not advocating that an employee goes and reads this and goes, "Oh, I'm going to just go be honest with that family business."
Hmm.
This is really written for the person on the flip side, whether it is the manager, the HR director, CEO saying, "Look, I can get a better outcome by changing how my company handles that, and I need to prove to employees that that is safe and that's okay." So when we rolled out this program, we said, "Look, come talk to us about these problems. We promise you will not be walked to the door. We promise. Like,
Hmm.
you can out us on this. You can tell everyone else. Like, if you want to have a discussion, but that has to come from the company side. You should not, yes, if you have a company that anytime anyone gives 2 weeks notice, they're asked to leave that day. And I know one of those companies, you should not go expect that you're going to tell them, hey, I don't want to be doing this job tomorrow. And they're going to be like, okay, let's figure something out for 90 days. So this needs to come from the managers and the organizations. But look, any leader on any team can actually implement a large part of this without having it need to be the default part of the organization. They can create that psychological trust. They can create, psychological safety and trust in their team. Their team can come to them and tell them things honestly. They can kind of orchestrate, better. They can know, they don't have to tell, like, you might know that the person's interviewing and say, all right, well, I'm going to give you like 60 days, go do your interviews. Just tell me what's going on. By the way, I'm going to reach out to HR and start. There's nothing that you couldn't do within a company's existing processes, right? With this. So it doesn't have to be the company policy per se.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that, because I think that's important, that this needs to come from the leaders. Also, what you're proposing is this is something that HR teams or companies overall can start to implement, but as leaders, instead of depending on the organization to provide it, what you're saying is you can actually implement a large part without within the bounds of the company's guidelines and rules. But tell us a little bit more about what that actually looks like. If I was managing a team of 15 people, a couple managers and ICs, and I'll say, hey, actually really like that. This seems like more authentic to me, seems more real. It
Yeah.
also, allows us for me to mitigate some risk of someone just walking out the door tomorrow. What are my first 3 steps?
I mean, your first steps are probably, saying to your team, hey, like, I want to have open, honest conversations. And if things aren't going well, or you feel frustrated, or and I'm going to do the same thing. I want us to have an honest conversation, and we'll figure out a way to figure something out. If ever this isn't the right job for you, or you think it might be a way, or you want to have a discussion around that, like, come and talk to me first. I can, I'll really feel let down if I find out you're telling me everything's great and interviewing behind my back, and that really won't get you the outcome you're looking for. I'd rather kind of know that, work on finding a replacement, and help you find a new job if that's what you want to do at the end of the day. And then really it's incumbent upon the manager, when they have those check-ins, to check in, to ask, are you happy? Are you present or engaged? Like, what's going on? Everyone knows when there's a problem. We just avoid it, right? Someone told me a recent story. He had been problem someone on his team for 90 days and was going hemming and hawing. What do I do with this person? And then was gearing up the courage to have the conversation that, I don't think this is going to work out. And that person came to them and quit 2 days before, right? So people know when they're not doing well. Their realities get into play. They might be scared. They might be looking to maximize it. But if we just change this whole, again, I can know you might want to do something else, and you can still do work here. Like, those don't have to be mutually, exclusive. I think this is just this false paradigm we've gotten ourselves into. So I think any manager who knows, someone once told me a story. There was a manager at the company, and you would think he was like Chainsaw Al, because like he had all this turnover on his team and everyone's always leaving. This guy just basically went to people and said, hey, look, if you're not happy, come to me and I'll figure out something better for you here. I'll figure out something better for you elsewhere, but I'll try to take care of you. And so what he had was not a lot of people hanging around who had quit and stayed on his team, which looks better on the numbers, but it doesn't look as good in the output department.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like what you just said there. It's sometimes, I think, the fear. I'm curious to hear your thoughts. The fear that, well, but if I have too much churn on my team and not enough retention, it's going to look poorly. It's going to provide or create this perception that I'm not a good leader. When in fact, qualitatively speaking, the feedback would be the reverse. But just looking from a KPI of churn, that fear may still get in the way.
Yeah, I don't think that churn is the determinant for any business. I think it's, do you have high performing, engaged employees who are delivering on the outcomes, right? I've never looked at. I mean, churn is usually emblematic of other problems or cultural problems, right? I've never had someone say, well, you're killing it, but your churn's really high, right? It's usually the churn, your churn's high, you have a lot of problems in other areas. So there might be some roles like sales where the people either work or where they don't. And so, getting the right people out is important and one of the most important things that you can do. So churn to me is one of those sort of under the hood diagnostics where if the car's not working, you sort of pull it over and see what's going wrong, but it's not the thing that people look at on a day-to-day basis, right? So on my sales team, I want to know if if we're hitting our goals, right? And that's probably by getting more of the right people and moving away from the wrong salespeople.
Mhm. Okay, so you're saying like this, the fear may come up in the back of your head, but that's not a rational fear. That's something to recognize of like, okay, this may be a little bit of my ego that seems bumped in
Yeah, right.
the way,
If you
but
have the
not
wrong
standing
person on your
action.
team
Yeah,
or they're doing the wrong thing, keeping them on your team to
right,
artificially inflate your churn does not
right,
actually do anyone any good.
right, right. This actually
If you
happens
have
quite often.
40% of the people on your team that want to move on, then there's a different problem, right?
Right.
You're
Yeah.
probably hiring the wrong people or not training them well. Like I said, it is the churn is the outcome of one of the things someone said to me once, which I thought was great, was they said, in this whole like, oh, everyone steals or everyone leaves our company horribly. And you're like, look, if everyone leaves your company and is stealing stuff and doing stuff, one, you're either hiring horrible people or two, your culture is doing something to make them want to steal from you. And like that requires a much closer look.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think oftentimes leaders are worried about the performers on the team or the retention of people on the team, and this comes up quite frequently in coaching conversations where we talk through what's actually the perception. Because if you think about senior leaders or even themselves assessing their direct reports, they
Yeah.
much rather see them retain high performers or keeping that strong culture and delivering on results and see them take action when something isn't working well. And so
Yeah.
their leadership competence isn't measured on or is everyone on the team sticking around or is are you hiring flawlessly? No, we all are going to hire people at some point that aren't going to work out or that want to leave at some point. And then the question is, how do you handle that and how quick and with how much urgency?
I think that is a great point. One of the biggest mistakes that I've seen a lot of companies make is that they manage or they evaluate their managers and leaders based on like contributor sort of metrics and statistics, rather than how are your leaders and managers managing? That should be the number one thing, right? The sales leader should be how are they coaching up the A players and pruning the B players? And so I think to what you said, what you're looking for from an amazing manager is can they hire well? Can they create a great culture in the team and promote and cultivate talent? And do they make the hard decisions and prune
Mhm.
well? Right. That is ultimately what they're looking for in a manager. And a lot of a great culture is pruning well, right? Because people who are negative culture to the team are bringing it down, or everyone, the three salespeople who are killing quota and the fourth has been below for 4 quarters. Like they want those leads that person's blowing. So yeah, I think that retention is one of those statistics that is probably not a leading indicator. It's a lagging indicator of other things that are going wrong.
Mhm. Well said.
And we don't get it right
Oh,
at all the time. But you
right.
can double down on your mistake by keeping the wrong person that you hired.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that then speaks to a different leadership competence that seems to be lacking and we might not realize that. Yeah. Um,
Yeah, I actually advocate in the book that people, one of the things you can do is like move away quickly from mistakes.
yeah.
And say to people, "Hey, I don't know this is working. Do you want to like pretend that this job never existed on your resume after 5 weeks and kind of go away? Because that seems better than a 6 month stint." And I would argue that most of us who have seen, and in organizations where you have the same training program, it's a little different if you hire like a one-off position, like a CFO that you don't hire a lot. But I can count on one hand over 20 years people who have start off horribly and it's worked out, right? You
Yeah.
you try everything, you double down on the training because what happens is they start off poorly, they're making a lot of mistakes, they build a trust deficit, people don't trust them, then they have to work harder, and you wish that this is going to get better. And again, maybe an honest conversation, like hey, Ramona, maybe we oversold you on something, or maybe you oversold us. I don't know what, but this, do you think this is working? This doesn't seem to be working. Again, do you want to just pretend this job never existed? That is better than a 6-month stint on a resume.
Yeah, 100%. I want to talk about the generational differences. So when you think about newer generations entering the workforce, and then a lot of leaders sort of being in a different generation, what kind of gaps or misunderstandings do you pick up as it relates to offboarding?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the older generation, they sort of know what they know, right? So they're more inclined to sort of lean into that. I also think the younger generations are more these days a little more conflict avoidant, a little more kind of looking at told what to be done. I've even noticed a lot of Gen Z struggles with unlimited PTO. I've heard this from a lot of companies. They're like, well, what does that mean? Like, how much can I take? You know, Gen Xers would be like, unlimited. All right, well, we'll figure it out. Like, it's interesting. So I just think whatever generation you're in, as long as you're consistent around, here is the values, here are the rules, here's how we operate. I actually think that's the stuff that brings multiple generations together when people can say, this is the culture, here's how we do it, and we're consistent and we lean into these principles. And I think everyone can appreciate that, and they just want to know, like, not that it's a game, but what game are we playing and what are the rules?
Mhm. I appreciate you advocating for principles. It's something that we do with the leaders in our programs is to clarify what are your leadership principles and to get really solid on the expectations, the implied expectations and the explicit expectations, and to share that and communicate frequently and honestly about what are the agreements on the team that we all need to know about. And I think on the generational gap, especially where we have assumptions that we think, well, everyone should know that in the workplace, and then we get confronted with situations that surprise us. It's to build that
Yeah,
bridge through transparent communication. Yeah.
I was just gonna say one of my favorite quotes from Harry Kramer, who's a leadership guru, always used to say, like, I'm surprised you're surprised, right? We're trying to eliminate like the things that we shouldn't be surprised. Like, for example, I if I incentivize people to give a longer notice, then I would be a little bit surprised if they left early. But I
Mhm,
think there are a lot of things that we shouldn't be surprised. If we walk everyone to the door, we shouldn't be surprised that they don't tell us things. So I think a lot of these things are predictable based on the things that we're rewarding explicitly or implicitly. So if you want different behavior values, you need to reward those behaviors. When we were rolling out this program and people still didn't believe us, that we
mhm,
wanted a longer notice and we would let them work, we started saying, look, if you tell us you're leaving and you give us 90 days, I think it was, we'll give you a $2,000 bonus. If you stay 60 days, 1,000. If you stay 30 days, they're like, oh, they're actually incentivizing me to stay longer. This
mhm,
must be the behavior that they want.
mhm. On a very practical question, if we talk about the principles and expectations and how we operate as a team, do you recommend for leaders to be very upfront, even with people that they hire and onboard, to then once they're on the team to say, here is how we go about work and all that, and then here's how we go about offboarding or parting ways?
Yeah, I suggest people like give this book or make it part of their onboarding because you could
Mhm,
actually say, look, if you pick the wrong company, if this isn't right, it's going to end well. Here's how we do onboarding. Here's how we do offboarding. Here's what I expect. I think expectations are, I expect that you're not going to give me 2 weeks notice. Like, it's fine if you want to leave. I'll give you a great recommendation, but I'm going to be pretty disappointed if after all of this and all these opportunities and every week when I sit down with you and I say, how's it going? Are you engaged? Are you excited? I'm gonna be upset if I find out you were lying and then interviewing. I think that's okay. Kind of like, look, if you miss your goals for 3 quarters in a row, like, we're gonna have an uncomfortable discussion. That's how it goes here. We're a performance-oriented culture. I think the more everyone can just tell employees who they are and what they value and what they reward, then the employees can make a great decision or a better decision around which environment they want to work in. I think a lot of it is like universities, right? There are all kinds of universities that people would consider great. There are large city ones with sports teams, there are small liberal arts ones. What they don't do is pretend they're the other one, right? They have totally different value propositions that appeal to different people. And I think that's what organizations are like. And I think they'd be better off telling everyone like what their value prop is, sticking with that, and not trying to be everything to everyone.
As we wrap up, what is something that we haven't talked about as it relates to the 2 weeks notice and then the program that you're advocating for companies or for leaders specifically?
Yeah, I'll talk a little bit more about this, the notion of an open transition program, which is that if you have these discussions, you can sit down with people and you can set windows, whether it's 60 days, 90 days, 120 days, where they can continue to do their work. You will, support them. They can interview and look for a new job. You can start looking for their hire. Everyone kind of stays in touch. It has a defined end date. And in the book, I talk about sort of the 7 steps to a transition program, which includes kind of a written plan and clear communication and timetable and all those things. But it's this notion that, people are in transition programs, and that transition can be started by the employee, and it can also be started by the employer. And I think it also beats the "you're fired," which is, hey, I just don't think this is going to work, and this isn't going to work. And so I'd like to start you in a transition. We'd like to pull you in our transition program and kind of get you working on what your next thing's going to be, and tell us how we can help. Can we make referrals? Can our interview team look at your resume for you? Like, we want you to go be from here. Like, this is, being an alumni of our organization is something that we're proud about. So this notion of these transition programs, it makes takes the jagged edges off this, like, I'm quitting or you're fired, into like, it's okay to be kind of going through the process of leaving, and kind of like a car crash. We're not going to litigate whose fault it is. It's just, you're moving on, and people move on, and that's totally fine.
And I can imagine it also entices people to communicate just by having that timeline to communicate way earlier. Because if I think back
Yeah.
to an experience in an organization where at a certain level of management, it was a 6-month notice period. So
Yeah.
for someone to get to the point where they quit, which is a pretty big step,
Right.
it's very firm. Like you
And
said,
then
it's
they're already like, that's also bad and different. So you want someone hanging around for 6 months who's sort of
6 months.
mentally already, right. That's got its
Dying,
own
dying.
problems. Yeah.
Right.
You can force them
So
to stay, but you can't force them to be happy. And yeah.
yeah,
That's
yeah,
why you have
it's a long
gardening
6
leave.
months for those people.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, this concept of gardening leave in Britain, right? Where you just send people home to garden and not to work, to keep them from going to work for a competitor.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Oh, and then imagining pulling them into a transition program just leaves so much more room for then even through the 6 months to decide, when am I going to specifically leave? What are the potential opportunities internally or externally? Yeah.
100%. Yeah.
I I wanted to bring you on because I think a lot of what defines our work culture really is we're just taking it for granted because we've been doing it for so long, and it just
Yeah.
seems like the norm without rethinking all along or all while we see how the workplace constantly changes and is evolving quite fast with, the pandemic that had a big impact, the generations that have a big impact, but yet sort of we were maintaining those frameworks and concepts that are, 40, 50 years old, and we don't really challenge them. So I appreciate the work that you do and what you promote. And I encourage all our listeners to really think about how they go about offboarding and the conversations that they're having. We will include your links to the book as well as your social media uh, pages in our show notes. And I encourage people to check it out and to read the book and learn more about the work that you do. So thank you, Robert, for being on the
Great.
Unity Track podcast.
Thank you for having me. And yeah, you can find out the book and everything at robertglazer.com.
robertglazer.com. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
If you enjoyed this episode, then check out 2 other awesome resources to help you become a leader people love to work with. This includes a free masterclass on how to successfully lead as a new manager. Check it out at arcova.org/masterclass. The second resource is my best-selling book, The Confident and Competent New Manager: How to Quickly Rise to Success in Your First Leadership Role. Check it out at arcova.org/books or head on over to Amazon and grab your copy there. You can find all those links in the show notes down below.